Welcome to another Coffee with Samso, where we speak with ASX companies about their projects. Today we're in Adelaide talking to Paul Wittwer, who is the exploration manager for Southern Gold, who have a series of projects in South Korea. Paul, maybe I'll hand it over to you and give us an intro what your role and your experience and far away.
Yeah, thanks Noel, thanks for having me on. I'm the exploration manager for Southern Gold. Yep. We've got a sort of a niche project play in South Korea. We've essentially got a series of projects that we're working on. We're pretty active in country, got a local team. We've got at least 4 geologists there and engineers that we manage from here. And we've got really basically a country play. It's a bit different compared to, say, other places where you can have a large tenure situation, but there we've kind of got basically Korea as our project, and then each of our projects are actually really prospects in the sense of tenure holding. So it's really quite an intriguing play. It's something that I guess basically we're there because there's been little modern exploration being completed, and it's just unbelievable, really. You know, you kind of walk up to stuff that just hasn't been even sampled before, let alone drilled, and we just feel like there's a lot of potential there, based on that, as well as obviously primarily the tectonic regime where it sits in between China and Japan. So yeah, it's really quite prospective, we think, and we just got to keep doing the work and hopefully find something.
Yeah. I mean, for a lot of people there, South Korea doesn't sort of strike as a place you go to look for gold or mineral deposits, but it does have a history running back to, I saw an article you wrote, it dates back to 80 something.
Roughly 900, yeah.
Yeah. So, and they've been mining even pre Second World War and in 1800s or something. So there's a lot of history, and I think the mineralization there is quite, well, not say unique, but it is common thing, except that it probably wasn't looked at that point in time. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess a lot of the production was really from about 1910 to 1940 under Japanese occupation, and they were highly advanced at the time. So even now we're finding stuff that they did 100 years ago, like in terms of mapping and so forth, that is really high quality, particularly for the time. And so they were well advanced, but even though at that point there wasn't really the epithermal understanding, I mean, that sort of came about really probably in the late 80s and 90s, like with the science and the academia side of it. But even then, in those Japanese records, I had photos of coliform banding and classic textures associated with epithermal systems. So yeah, there's definitely, I mean, that's our focus. So there's different types of deposits, but epithermals are the ones, or particularly low sulfidation epithermal deposits, is what we're primarily targeting. Simply because we think there's a good chance of getting a lot of ounces and high grade in those types. So
yeah, I think when Simon, managing director of Southern Gold, we had a conversation about things, and I think one of the issues was one of the factors in South Korea, what makes it so attractive, is that prior to Ivanhoe discovering those things, the epithermal system wasn't really recognized as a style to look for in Korea. And then Ivanhoe came and found those deposits, as I'm quoting from there. But so can you give us an idea? Obviously, it wasn't discovery of sliced bread, but it was actually, in some aspect, was, that you can explain a lot more with this style of mineralization.
Yeah, well, I mean, so obviously one of our directors, Doug Kerwin, he basically became interested in Korea after looking at the atlas that the UN put out in the late 80s, and he noticed there was the coliform banding and sort of those epithermal textures, and it wasn't recognised at the time. So he went there with another geo, and they basically looked into it, and they went to Tongyong, which is on the south coast, and they found the mine, and it was clearly low sulfidation epithermal. So that's why he became involved, and then subsequently with Indochina Goldfields and later Ivanhoe, they basically did a fair bit of work, but never finished the job, basically. So after finding the OT deposit in Mongolia, it just changed the game for Ivanhoe. So they kind of it basically got put on ice, the South Korean exploration effort. So yeah, it's actually like a bit of a time warp. I'm sure for Doug it's kind of the circle of life in many ways. So yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, at the time they had 26 geos rolling through there, even on their breaks from Mongolia. And we're even using some of those now as consultants. So it's really quite interesting.
Even from discovering that there's a new style of mineralization, I think the last batch of work there was almost 2 decades. So there's a very little work, real modernization of exploration techniques being used. So when you guys are out there, obviously your in-country guys are working away. Is there anything that you guys are doing now that you think is going to be significantly giving you, of significance compared to, say, 20 years ago in terms of techniques?
Not necessarily. I think it depends on what you're targeting. With low sulfidation, sometimes it can be quite narrow, and you can't use your classic broader scale geophysics as easily. Part of the issue is they don't have good country-wide data sets like Australia or US or Canada, for example. So that's kind of usually your base map that you start with. But having said that, what we're actually trying to do is just get on the ground anyway. Just do basic sort of fact mapping and sampling, try to get the right textures identified, and then hone in from there. So it does take a bit longer, but I think it's the only really way you're going to find anything, and that's exactly what Ivanhoe did. So it worked for them. And we're just continuing that effort, which means you've got to systematically do that. So in some ways, yeah, it is a bit frustrating to try to get results immediately, but it's just going to take time, you know. Yeah.
In terms of in some ways, what you're saying is that there's textural signatures that you can see, and you have outcrops, as opposed to the goldfields where you have no outcrops, and you're literally just looking for geochemical samples, right? Signatures, I should say. So, would that be you? Could you say that that's an advantage, that you got everything's outcropping, and you can actually see the geology?
Definitely, that's a huge advantage. I mean, if we were rolling up anywhere in Australia and getting, plus 5 gram rock chips, or even in the case of some of these, 100 gram rock chips, and percent silver, you'd be drilling it straight away. Like, it's actually unbelievable that it hasn't been drilled already. And so in terms of, sorry about your previous question with the modern techniques, I mean, it depends on what you need. Obviously with Australia, because of the cover, you've had to use these kind of geophysical techniques to actually see beneath the cover. But if you've got outcrop, you can sort of do a lot of that work to start with. But having said that, we have done some drone magnetics, for example, because that was where it was undercover at one of our projects at APE. But it's horses for courses. There we thought we had a low magnetite destruction, so a magnetic low. So that was the theory there. That's why we did it. But I mean, mag's useful just for structural identification. So that's one of our key things we're trying to work out too, is finding a good structural trap for fluids. It's not just a matter of finding outcrop and drilling it. There's a series of other things that we're doing, including soil sampling. We've been rolling that out pretty hard recently, because we think that's going to give us a broader picture and see the outcrop that's, because you don't get outcrop everywhere. So just to give a bit of a broader picture, and our best place to drill.
When you think about when you actually can see the outcrop, you can see the rock, the mineralizing textures. Sometimes it's actually better, because it actually tells you so much more of a story than just getting geochemical data, right?
That's right. Yeah. That's a key thing for us. So we really have to identify the right textures. and see where you are in the system, because there's usually a bit of a zonation vertically with epithermal systems. So yeah, that's a big thing, and that's why we have to do diamond drilling as well. But it's also partly due to the terrain. It's a bit difficult to kind of roll a RC rig around, or an air core rig. But in some ways, because there's limited cover, or it's basically just colluvium where there is cover. Essentially, our soil sampling is kind of like air core or RAB drilling in the Australian sense, because you're right there at the saprolite, lower saprolite. So it's probably a cheaper way in many ways, and it's closer. So you don't have the issue of if you find anything, you won't have a big a lot of cover to deal with. You can just start mining pretty close to surface as well. So
you know, when Ivanhoe discovered those mines, I guess that's clear evidence that you can actually mine something there, and there are enough there to mine. I mean, although a lot of the number of thousands, it runs in hundreds of thousands of ounces, those. But you know, Hishikari across there with the similar sort of style has been going for decades, and they're mining really big grades, big numbers.
No, definitely. I mean, that's produced something like 7 million ounces so far, with about 5 in reserve, 5 million ounces. So, and high grade. So I guess that's at the upper end of the scale. That's a proper tier 1 deposit. But you know, and the stuff that Ivanhoe found were obviously less than that, but they've been mined for basically 20 years nearly. And still going. It's mined privately, so it's a bit hard to exactly know what's going on. But yeah, even so, you're probably going to get a bit of a spectrum there in between, 500,000 ounces and 12. But obviously, we're targeting that tier 1, and there's a few factors that you need. So you need that structural position. There's clearly mineralization in the Cretaceous, which was producing these epithermal deposits, so we're in the right kind of region. But you also need at the local scale, like a proper lithological trap, which is what happened at Hishikari, because it's kind of all the fluids ponded at the shale boundary, and then you also need the right chemistry of the fluids too, in order to precipitate the gold. So so there's a series of factors. You kind of got to get them all before you're going to find a deposit. So
that's why there's a phrase of you got to get all your ducks in a line and all that. But you know, when I think of other styles of mineralization, even if it's porphyry or VMS, and I don't know why, and it's probably incorrect, but I think structurally control and all this kind of stuff, for some reason, don't ask me why, but when people talk to me about epithermal, hydrothermal, I think chemistry. Is am I like way off, or is that there is a difference, or there's a more influencing chemistry part to the system?
Yeah, definitely. I think particularly with low sublimation, because you got the influence of groundwater and then how it flows through underneath and then mixes with the magmatic fluids. So that's a key thing, and you can get variations of that, really, like with bicarbonated waters or more oxygenated. So it just depends, on the mixing and where it is and where it actually deposits in relation to the lithology too. So it's definitely a big control.
If that was the case, I'm putting my exploration geologist hat on, not after your job, but when you look at that, if your area is epithermal rich style, as opposed to say something that's structurally controlled for whatever reason, is that going to give you? Does that mean that you got a better chance that you're going to find that style of mineralization in there, or something's going to be a deposit in that region or province of that style?
Well, it depends on what it is. Like every deposit's unique in its own way too, but there's just a few factors that need to be right basically for epithermal. I mean, epithermal really is fundamentally close to surface in terms of deposition. So in terms of career, like you can get the deeper level orogenic systems, which are related to the subduction of Paleo-Pacific plate underneath, and then you get this emplacement probably greater than 6 kilometres for your orogenic systems. But really epithermal is close to that 1 kilometre kind of mark. But there's also an intrusion related one in Korea, which is called Korean type. It's a bit of a loose term, but it's sort of a, in between mesothermal to epithermal kind of range. It's a sort of a hybrid that's more related to the intrusion. But yeah, the epithermals are basically close to the surface, and you've got a sweet spot there of where the pressure temperature conditions are right, usually about like 180 degrees to 280 maybe, where you've got a sort of a column of, so you might have 400 metres, say, of where you're going to target, and there'll be a bit of a zonation in that, but sometimes you can get telescoping of the system too, so you can get like an overprint, sort of a multi-phase overprint, even potentially with other metals coming in later. So it can be, there's every deposit's unique basically, so you kind of got to keep an open mind, but recognise that there's certain parameters that are making that, informing that to be that specific deposit type. Okay.
Paul, the reason why I asked you that question was really because there's a lot of viewers out there who actually hear these terms, but they don't actually quite understand it. I mean, people like us Geos, we talk about these things, but can you just give us a quick sort of a 101 on what an epithermal system is and why it's so good?
Yeah, so I guess we'll focus on particularly low sulfidation epithermal, because that's one end member that we're trying to target. There's high sulfidation epithermal, which is a bit different. So the reason for the difference between the term sulfidation is to do with the amount of SO2 in the fluids. So with a high sulfidation system, you'll have more of an acidic fluid, whereas low sulfidation is a bit more neutral to slightly alkaline. So that's to do with the chemistry of the deposition, and so the term epithermal is really closer to surface in terms of the temperature conditions as well. So it's a lower temperature condition of deposition, usually between 180 degrees and 280 roughly, and you'll get a bit of a zonation of metals. Sometimes you'll get maybe those base metals at the bottom. So essentially it's related to a magmatic source that's relatively close to the surface, and then with the gold coming in from the magmatic fluids, and then reacting with the different variations of the groundwater and other fluids to deposit out the gold, and you can get this overprinting and multi-phase kind of fluid where you can basically have higher grades. So that's fundamentally the reason, I guess, is the potential for really high grades, bonanza type grades, like hand sorting material. Okay. And you see it basically, all around the Pacific Rim. It's the majority of your low sulfidation deposits. So.
Okay. When I think VMS, I used to say VMS, small companies can do it because it's normally really high grade. There may be much smallish in size, but in terms of cost to get it up and running, a small company can do it. It's always very higher grade. When you start talking porphyries, you're very much lower grade, but then volume's a lot, magnitude's bigger, and it tends to be for companies with really deep pockets. IOCG again, another one where, for me, I said, oh well, you need deep pockets, it's, et cetera, et cetera. What can I say about epithermal?
So I guess that's more focused on the grade. So you're trying to find that high grade. Sometimes it may be tricky to drill. It might require a bit of drilling to define it. It might be a little bit potty, or you might understand exactly the parameters. But once you find it, you can pretty well, particularly if you've got a consistent vein. So usually you've got quite a narrow vein, a few meters. So in terms of tons, it's a pretty easy engineering exercise. Metallurgically, it depends on the deposit, but it should be reasonably okay. You'll get the silver credits most likely as well. Okay. Which, with the low sulfidation in Korea, they seem to be about 50 to 1 in terms of silver ounces versus gold ounces, potentially in terms of the low sulfidation type. So, silver price, depending on how that goes, that's a fair credit.
Yep.
So yeah, it's fundamentally potential for a lot of ounces in a small area.
Yep.
Due to the grade. So.
Okay. Oh, look, Paul, I mean, I think that's a load for viewers out there, but I think the intention of this is just, I think it's really a good opportunity for someone like yourself who's working in there in a unique position, because I always said that the Southern Gold is the gold road of Korea, because you guys got, as you corrected me, you're the only player there. And as opposed, and then, obviously if you're going to find something, you guys are going to benefit, well, I could say, use the word. I guess, going forward, Paul, what could you say to someone out there who's heard someone says, oh, this is an epithermal deposit, whatever. What could they be asking, the questions that they should be asking for out there? If someone says, hey, I'm searching for epithermal deposits, these are my results, what could they be looking for that will would help them say, oh, these guys are on track?
Yeah, I guess the main reason why we're there is the tectonic environment. So you've got basically a continuum between China, Korea and Japan. Japan's a bit younger with the mineralization, obviously, but it's the same sort of tectonic environment. So Korea in the Cretaceous 140 million years ago was, it was basically a subduction zone, and there was volcanic activity, and these basins kind of opened up in like a rifting, rift basins, and then you get volcanic input in through there. So in terms of the setting, that's why we're there, for that reason. And it's clear that there are epithermal deposits there, and it's just a matter of finding them. So in Japan, it's younger, but the trouble there is you've got a lot more depth to your ore body because it's younger. You don't have the erosion. Whereas that's why in Korea it's close to the surface, so there's no sinters or anything like that. Compared to Japan. So that's an advantage, we think. Plus we've got outcropping mineralization potentially. So yeah, in terms of that's fundamentally why we're there, is for the tectonic regime.
Okay. All right. Look, Paul. Thank you. Thanks for giving time for us and giving us Epithermal Geology 101. You've given me a good lesson anyway. And I hope you guys do well. Follow up with more stories about Southern Gold and South Korea.
Excellent. Thanks, Noel.